Welcome to all of you who have joined us for this International Cultic Studies Association webinar. It is one towards the end of a series of 4 weeks of webinars under the general title Recovery Not Cancel, which is being presented because so many of the actual physical gatherings of many organizations and of this organization as well had to be canceled. But we are aware that this is a very difficult time. It's a difficult time for everyone, and especially for people who have been through the challenging experience of belonging to a cultic organization. So we've continued with these webinars. The usual hostess, is Ashlyn Hilliard. She's in Oregon. Her internet is down. So I am at Stamler. I'm on the board of International Cultic Studies Association. So I have been recruited. All mistakes are mine. Everything else is to the credit of the organization. So this evening, our subject is parenting after the cult. And our speaker is Eva Mackey, who is a person with great experience in this field. I know her as a co-facilitator on the annual Connecticut workshop for people who were born or raised in cultic environments. Eva is a second-generation former member whose father was a tenured professor of philosophy at the University of Texas at Austin. Her mother was a devotee of an Eastern cult that practiced a branch of Hinduism called Advaita Vedanta. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes, you did. That's good.
Okay. A non-dualistic philosophy that teaches that the self is one with the ultimate truth or reality. Half of Eva's childhood was spent in an ashram in India, where she and the other children were unsupervised much of the day. Despite the upheavals and instability that characterized her childhood, Eva managed to get out of the cult at the age of 16 and eventually earned her MD from the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. Dr. Meyrat has a busy family practice, and she lives near Dallas with her 3 small children. So Eva Mackey on parenting after the cult.
Thank you, Anne. I appreciate your introduction. You did a really great job. I will have to update that introduction a little bit. I guess I wrote it a while ago because my children are no longer small. They're all either they're teenagers and preteens. So, which is awesome because I have even more years of experience to share with you all, because now I have experience parenting teenagers as an adult former cult member, in addition to parenting small children. So I would like to start with this quote here. I love this quote because this describes me to a T. Like every parent, I want nothing so much as my children's well-being. I want it so badly, I may actually succeed in turning myself into a contented and well-adjusted person, if only for the children's sake. You know, this was me even before I had kids, because I always knew I wanted to be a parent. I mean, but even when I was a teenager, when I was 13 years old, I was making plans for when I was going to be a mom. And so many of the things, the self-improvement or the healing projects that I embarked on were really done with the intent that for my kids, knowing that if I wanted to create a good environment for my kids, I myself had to be healthy and happy. So I think that if you are a parent, you can probably relate to what I'm talking about. It's something we want so bad, and yet it's difficult to achieve. Here, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I mean, I think Anne did a really excellent job, actually, but I am a second-generation former cult member. I was raised in a Hindu cult that my mother joined when I was 1 year old. And from that point on, we spent a great deal of our life in his ashram in South India. Our time was pretty much split 50% between the ashram in South India, and then we would come back to America for a few months at a time. So this is me as about 4 or 5 year old in that environment. What are some of the challenges, the special challenges that we face as adult second generation former cult members when we're raising our own kids? I think that, you know, in talking with adult former cult members, there's a lot who have actually just avoided parenting entirely because they're so scared that they can't do it right, you know, that they have nothing to draw from when it comes to parenting, and they're afraid of just kind of screwing up their own kids. And that's those are fears that I can relate to, because we don't have any healthy models of parenting. We have nothing. I mean, most people, when they parent, they model their parenting after what their own parents did, but we are acutely aware of how dysfunctional that was, and we know that we can't do that. So like everything we do as second generation adult former cult members, we have nothing reliable from our past to draw from, and we are starting from scratch. So we are trying to figure it out from the ground up. So that is very daunting, you know. And it's interesting that, you know, I really wanted to be a parent from the very beginning, and I really think that for me it was because I always felt that I didn't have a family, and I thought that if the family I was born into wasn't a real family, maybe I could create my own. I wanted somebody to love, and that was probably one of my big motivations. So as challenges we're faced with as adult second generation. So we have no healthy role models. We've got to figure this out from the ground up. How do we avoid making the mistakes of the past? We obviously don't just want to repeat everything that our parents did. But on the other hand, we can't resort to reactive parenting. Reactive parenting is when you don't repeat the mistakes of your parents, but you maybe go too far in the other direction. So for example, if you were really harshly disciplined in the cult, maybe you decide that you don't need any discipline or structure for your children at all. And that's not good either. So the challenge is we want to find a healthy way of parenting, and a healthy way of parenting is it's not just doing something different than our parents. It's something different than that. It's something that we really are going to have to create from the ground up. Okay, well, here is the first challenge that I remember facing as a mom with little kids. And little kids are so hard because, I mean, their little brains are just so concrete, you know, and you can't explain really complicated or abstract things to them. So, but they ask you a million questions, right? And so how are you supposed to explain all of this to your kids? I mean, you have got to keep it so simple when they are little. This is something that I came up with that helped. I said, a man from India tricked Amma. So my mom went by the name of Amma. That's what she wants my kids to call her anyway, which means mother in Malayalam, which is the area of India that we were in. So it's kind of weird, but that's what she wants them to call her. Anyway, a man from India tricked Amma, my mother, into believing that he was God. As a result, Amma made a lot of really bad choices. So, okay, Satya Sai Baba. So some of you may be familiar with Satya Sai Baba. Now, this is not the cult that we belong to. We were in, I would call it a rival cult. Our cult was in South India around the same time as Satya Sai Baba. But anyway, Satya Sai Baba is kind of good because he does help illustrate for the kids what this looks like. What does it look like when a bad man from India or a cult leader tricks somebody into believing that he's God? Well, Satya Sai Baba is an easy one for the kids to grasp for a few reasons. First of all, he's very well documented. So it's pretty easy to do a YouTube search and find Satya Sai Baba. Number two is that his sort of brand of deception is very concrete and something that kids can understand. So, for example, he would manifest little figurines out of sand, which is, you know, really just a common magician's trick. but he would do this and convince all of his followers that he was able to do this because he was God and he had special powers. So, you know, you can show your kids like videos of stuff like that, and they can grasp that pretty simply, understanding that actually he's just doing a simple magic trick, and yet he's able to use his magic trick to convince all these people that he's God. And once he's got them convinced, well, man, they'll do anything for him. This is a tough one that I faced when my kids were little. They saw me reading books about cults. They knew that I was part of the International Cultic Studies Association. And eventually the inevitable question is, Mommy, what is a cult? And here is an answer that I came up with for them, something very concrete, something that their little minds can grasp. A cult is the group of people who are, it's a group of people who are tricked by someone, like my mother was, into believing that he is God or has special powers. The people work hard for the bad man or woman and give him everything they have because they believe him. In the end, the only person who gets anything out of it is the bad man or woman. He or she is just using them for power and money. They end up with nothing because they give everything and get nothing back. It's all a big lie. It's a trick. Okay, well, here's a really challenging thing, is explaining my relationship with my mother to the kids. Now, some second generation adults have good relationships with their parents, and that's, you know, I'm glad they do, but a lot of people like me really struggle with those relationships. And it's hard, you know, it's hard to know what to tell your kids about that, because kids are, their friends have grandparents who are visiting all the time, and it's just a different kind of situation. And in my case, what makes it even more complicated, you know, it would be easier, I'd say, if I could just keep my mother out of their lives entirely, but I can't, because since I divorced the kid's dad, she has become best buddies with my ex-husband, and she is over there at his house pretty much whenever the kids are, and she spends a lot of time with him and his extended family. So whenever they see my ex, which is like every other weekend, they're seeing my mom, and so he's in their lives. So, but this is what I tell my kids, you know, regardless of your feelings, you need to allow your children to have their own feelings about your parents. So I tell them that I can't love Amma because she has done and continues to do things to me that are hurtful, and she is very bad for me. And because she's bad for me, it's best for me to keep her out of my life. However, I understand that she treats them differently, and it's okay for them to love Amma even though I don't. So, you know, you cannot project your feelings about your extended family or your parents onto your kids, you know, as long as you don't feel like your parents are actively dangerous for your kids. And in the case of my mother, I don't. I think she's okay. They view her as kind of a nut job, which is pretty accurate, actually. And I think the kind of crazy stuff that she says to them doesn't really scare them like it would have for me. And probably that has a lot to do with how grounded I am, because if she says something crazy and they tell me about it, you know, we're able to just laugh it off and go, I mean, they've already heard from me. They already know from me that she's just crazy, and, you know, we're not going to worry about it. So, you know, sometimes, I mean, that's the other scary thing sometimes as a parent, is you remember how hurtful your parents were to you, and you wonder if they're going to hurt your children. I'll tell you what, though, you know, if you're there, your kids are going to listen to you. They're not going to listen as much to the crazy stuff that your parents are telling them. But you have to allow them to have their own relationship with your parents. Okay, religion. Here's a tough one. Most of us second generation adult former cult members really struggle with this question. How are we supposed to teach any kind of religion to our kids? I mean, how are we supposed to teach them anything at all when we don't know what we believe in ourselves? I mean, everything that we thought we knew about religion was pretty much ripped out from underneath us when we left the cult. And some of us are struggling to decide if there's any God at all. Some of us some of us may have found a different religion. In my experience, most haven't. And I find a lot of agnostics and atheists. So I think it's important that whatever you believe, that you do teach your children what you believe. But the important thing is that your children know that no matter what they decide to believe, that you are going to love them. That is so important, because the child always has to come before the ideology. That's not the way it was for us. The ideology came first. The religion, the cult, the cult leader came before us. We knew that if we expressed any kind of dissent, that we would lose the love of our parents. Our children need to know that no matter what, their parents are going to love them. I think that it's good to give them whatever you do believe, just as some sort, as a guidance, you know, as something to grasp onto. But then they have to have the freedom to make their own choices. And so here's something that I really didn't anticipate before having kids. So I do believe in God, you know. I don't particularly have any religion. I mean, I would say I'm some kind of Christian, but I don't have a church that I go to on a regular basis, and I don't really know what kind of denomination I would be in. So kind of the lack of religion on my part meant that my ex-husband's religion sort of filled that void. And so for better or for worse, they're being raised as Catholics. And so I think that, you know, if you don't have something really, really strong to give them from your side, then that's probably what's going to happen, is that whatever your partner's religion is going to be the one that takes over. I find that what I can do for the kids, though, is give them a little bit of perspective on it, because I'm not Catholic, and I can help them understand that they don't have to follow the religion that closely, that ultimately that the priests and the Pope are fallible, and that they have to listen to their own hearts. So you can, you know, I don't know how strongly the other parent believes in their religion, but if they're pretty adherent, or if they're pretty fundamentalist about it, you know, you can sort of temper it a little bit just by being an alternative and making sure that you explain that to your kids, that it's okay not to be, you know, a hardcore Catholic or a hardcore whatever the other parent is. Okay, relationships are definitely a struggle for me too, and it became so much more something in the forefront after I had kids. I mean, not that it wasn't in the forefront already, but it just became so much more serious after I had kids. Because for me, I mean, I'm attracted to abusers like a fly to shit. I mean, honestly, it's when you leave a cult, and when you were a second generation adult former cult member, the cult was your identity. You know, you had no pre-cult identity. The cult imposed an identity on you. And when you leave the cult, you are left, well, all of that is just torn out, is just uprooted. And you are left with nothing to fall back on. You are an empty void. I was hollowed out inside when I left. And I think that I sought out people who, hoping that they would fill that empty void. And of course, the only people who want to fill an empty void like that are narcissists and sociopaths. I mean, healthy people are not interested in giving another person an identity, right? So, the people who I formed relationships with were abusers, and plus, so it wasn't just the fact that I was looking for somebody to fill an empty void. It's also just that in my past, I'd only had relationships with narcissists and abusers. I mean, that's who the cult authorities were. That's who my mother was. That's who my father was. I only had those relationships. So that's what I was drawn to. And that's what I married. And it became a real problem. I mean, I was able to tolerate it. I felt like for me, it was normal. I was used to it. I didn't realize how pathological and how bad it was until I started to see those abusive patterns play out in the relationship between my ex-husband and the kids. And when I saw my ex-husband treating the kids in some of these ways, that's when I put my foot down and I was like, okay, I've got to do something. And so I ended up divorcing their dad because I found that it was easier to protect them when I wasn't married to him, because it was easier to call CPS, and it was easier to take action or to do things. Like I had a lawyer write a letter to him once. I mean, it was easier for me to do things to change his behavior when I was divorced from him rather than married to him. So I did end up leaving their dad, and and then of course I found myself dating again, and and I was scared. You know, I was dating. I wanted somebody new in my life. I was lonely, honestly. I needed an adult companion. On the other hand, I was dead serious about not bringing another abuser into our lives. Because I mean, now if I paired up with another abuser, it wouldn't just be somebody who was abusing me. Now it would be somebody who was abusing them. And that was absolutely unacceptable. I could not do that. And I had to have a really well thought out and well structured plan to prevent that from happening. And I found myself in a situation where I felt like I was parenting myself. And I say, and this slide says, "Mommy, parent thyself." Well, this is a picture of me when I was about 17 years old, when I was in my late teens, when I first started dating. And I remember at that age, just having zero boundaries when it came to dating and when it came to relationships, and letting men walk all over me, and not having a parent to help me with those boundaries. I mean, literally, when I was 16, 17 years old, I could stay out all night with a guy, and my dad wouldn't care. So I decided that I needed to learn how to parent myself. You know, I hadn't been parented as a teenager, and nobody had taught me any kind of good ground rules for how to date. But I was old enough now that I could do that for myself. And so I could parent this teenage girl trying to figure out healthy dating patterns. And so I came up with some ground rules. And, you know, one thing that's really helpful, if you're a parent yourself and you're dating and you have kids, you know, think about what would you want for your daughter? What would you tell your daughter, you know? And if somebody stood her up, or somebody was an alcoholic, you would say, no, you can't go out with that person. That person's no good. And that's kind of what I had to do for myself. So what I did is I came up with a list of deal breakers, things that would, if I saw these characteristics at all, I'd just call it off. It was done. And no ifs, ands, or buts. I mean, it is what it is. So I did not tolerate lying about anything at all. I mean, even a guy who was 50, if he told me he was 49, I mean, that's just, you know, you start out with a lie. I mean, where does it go from there? So no, we don't do any, we don't tolerate lies. Don't tolerate substance abuse of any sort whatsoever. People who are unable to take any responsibility for things that go wrong in their life, people who have a tendency to blame everything on somebody else. That's no good. If you don't take responsibility, you can't make any positive changes in your life. People who make a mountain out of a molehill, raging. So that's a big one for me that I really just don't want anyone yelling at me or screaming at me. I feel like whatever happened, I don't deserve that. So there has to be another way to express your feelings. History of bankruptcy. I didn't want to find myself in a situation where I was taking care of somebody else financially. Any criminal records, obviously that's, if they have a history of crime in the past, I mean, it's probably going to repeat itself. I'd say, past history is the best way to predict what's going to happen in the future. Bad boundaries. So people who can't respect your boundaries, somebody who texts you at 12 a.m. every night, even though they know you go to bed at 10. I mean, these things are no good. People who can't respect sexual boundaries. Well, that's a huge one. And if you say no and they keep pushing, no, that's no good. Somebody who complains about other people all the time, bad mouths people all the time, not open to psychotherapy. I mean, if you have issues and they're not open to addressing it in psychotherapy, then, where's there room for improvement? Jealousy is always a bad one, because if they're jealous, they think they own you, and they don't. So somebody who's excessively jealous is no good. Sarcasm can be good. I mean, a lot of us use it as a defense mechanism or a coping strategy. So maybe it's not all bad, but sometimes, people who are excessively sarcastic, sometimes it's because they don't actually know how to express themselves or get their needs met. So sometimes it can be a bad thing. It's just, it kind of depends on the situation, but sometimes that's what it says. Obviously, somebody who doesn't like kids, that's going to be a no-go. Because for me, because I have kids, and well, yeah, you all might have kids too, because that's what the talk is about. Anyway, here's a little slide that I like to throw in there, because I love that song. I love the No song from Meghan Trainor that came out like 4 years ago. I loved it, so I just stuck this slide in there. Anyway, if you haven't heard Meghan Trainor's No song, you got to go check it out. It's pretty good. She's got some good stuff too. I like it. Okay, well, you got to model good sexual boundaries. That's really important. Your kids are so aware of everything you do. If it's something that you don't want, that you wouldn't want your kids to do when they're teenagers, then don't do it yourself. So for me, it was really important that I didn't have somebody spend the night until it was somebody who I was serious with enough to actually marry. So that's and I didn't actually introduce them to the man I was dating until I knew that I was going to marry him, because I didn't want them bonding with somebody who wasn't going to be around. Because if they bond with somebody and then you break up and he's gone, then it's not just one broken heart. You've got all their broken hearts to deal with. So that was something else that I did. Okay, I want to talk about discipline, because this is a really tough one. This is really tough for me. I'll be honest. This is a really tough one. A lot of us experience discipline in our cults as abuse, because it was not designed to benefit us, the children. It was designed to benefit the cult leader. However, let me point this out. Our children will not experience discipline as abuse, because it's designed to benefit the child. There's a big difference there. So healthy forms of discipline benefit the children. It's not cruel, it's not mean or abusive. It provides structure and keeps the child safe in a loving and caring way. So children really need discipline in order to feel loved. They know that they are loved when a parent cares enough to create healthy structure. For example, if you care enough to make sure your kids buckle their seatbelt in the car, then they're going to feel loved. If you care enough to make sure that they don't go to a swimming pool when there's not a grown-up around, they're going to feel loved. Children don't feel loved when they feel neglected, and when they feel that I mean, when you neglect them, it makes them feel like you don't care if they live or die. So creating these healthy structures and boundaries helps them feel safe and cared for. And it helps them learn to self-regulate. It helps them learn how to take care of themselves. For example, when you create good structure around things like bedtime, brushing teeth, taking baths, they are going to learn these, and they're going to be these things, and they're going to be able to do these things on their own without being told all the time. And then moving on into adulthood, they're also going to be able to do this. I mean, you know, if you establish a good bedtime early on, they're more likely to be able to go to bed at a reasonable time as adults, and then and not have sleeping disorders and things like that. So some basic ways that parents offer structure. Number one, non-negotiable rules. So these are rules. This is where parents pretty much lay down the law, reflect the parents' values and judgments about what's safe and unsafe, helpful and unhelpful. So some examples of non-negotiable rules might be, for example, we always brush our teeth before we go to bed, and we're not going to negotiate that. There's not an option there. We do our homework. That's not something that is negotiable. It's something that must be done. Negotiable rules might be, so negotiable rules are things where you and the child can kind of make a decision together, and this teaches the children how to think and how to problem solve. So negotiable rules, maybe what kind of snack to have at snack time, or what you want to make for dinner. And now rules that start out as non-negotiable often become negotiable rules as your child ages. So these things are not set in stone. These things change. Like, for example, bedtime used to be a non-negotiable rule for me. When the kids were little, everybody went to bed at 9 o'clock, and that was not negotiable, because I needed those kids in bed, because I knew that I didn't get to rest until the kids were in bed, and therefore they had to get to bed because I needed at least a little time for myself. But now that I've got some older kids, teenagers and things, that's more negotiable. I really don't enforce those bedtimes like I used to now. And of course, now with our online schooling, oh my gosh, everything's changed. So we were still doing pretty much a 9 o'clock bedtime for my youngest until the online schooling thing started. But my 15-year-old bedtime has kind of turned into, it's whenever it's negotiable. I'll just say that, as long as he's getting up and going to school in the morning, I'm pretty much good. Anyway, okay, so we create age-appropriate consequences for breaking rules. Timeout is good for the little kids, 1 through 6 years old. And for older kids, it's going to be more taking away privileges like Xbox or iPad or something like that, or maybe just kind of allowing for natural consequences. Spanking is not appropriate in any age group. And let me stress the importance of positive feedback. This is huge. It depends on your kid. I mean, well, everybody responds to positive feedback, but I mean, for some in particular, it's just this is much more important than any kind of negative consequences. And I found that some of the kids, when you reward the good behavior, it just gets you so far. And parents have got to model the desired behavior for the children. That is really important too. I can't tell you how many parents I have. Well, I'm a physician, so I have a lot of parents, my patients who are parents, asking me about how to deal with some of their little kids' behavior. And a lot of parents tell me that their kids won't sleep at night. And then, you know, I ask the parents, well, what about you? When do you go to bed? And I'm like, oh, I stay up till 3 a.m. You know, I just want the kid in bed so I can party. No, look, if you're not sleeping at night, neither are your kids. You know, you have to model these behaviors for your kids. And ultimately the kids learn more from these role models than they do from critics. So here's some tips on how to deliver effective discipline. So well, first of all, your expectations have to be clear. So the kids are going to be confused if you don't make the expectations clear up front. They're going to be confused, and the discipline won't work because they're not going to understand where it came from. It needs to be delivered. Don't deliver the discipline when you're really super angry, okay? That's not the way to do it, because that's when discipline is more likely to turn abusive, is when you're doing it out of anger. So you need to go have your own little mommy or daddy timeout, let all that anger go, and then come back to deliver discipline. And it needs to be done in a really low-key, matter-of-fact kind of way. Like, you know, I'm sorry you did X, Y, or Z. Now you're not going to have your iPad for the next 2 days. And so you don't want to be yelling and screaming at your kids at this point. It needs to be delivered promptly after the offense so that they're not confused about why they're being disciplined. And after the discipline, they need to start over with a clean slate. So we're not going to constantly harp on what happened last week or the week before. We are going to start over new. And the children are allowed to have their own feelings over the discipline. So they're allowed to feel frustrated, angry over not getting what they want. So we don't discipline their feelings, we just discipline the actions. Okay, so here's some common mistakes that parents can make. Becoming too rigid with your rules. The rules need to change with the changing needs of the child. Like, for example, I talked about how as your children age, in particular, rules that apply to little children do not apply to big children. Things need to change. Being critical, calling them names, being critical instead of helpful. You know, if they don't do well on an assignment, you don't need to talk about how stupid they are, how lazy they are. Rather, you know, you need to direct them into helpful pathways. Criticizing them just damages their self-esteem and really doesn't get you anywhere. Marshmallowing, well, this one is probably my worst one right here. Failing to follow through with discipline grants freedom without demanding responsibility. Yeah, I might do that sometimes, just being a little bit inconsistent. I can do that. Anyway, abandonment, complete lack of rules, and complete lack of rules and failing to protect the children at all. That one. So that's, you know, that's when you don't care if your little kids go to the neighborhood swimming pool without a grown-up, or, you know, who cares if they're buckled in the car. That's kind of how my life was as a little kid, but definitely not good for the kids. It doesn't make them feel loved or cared for if nobody cares. Okay, so I wanted to finish things up here by talking a little bit about teenagers. And I recently have become the mother of teenagers, and it's going a lot better than I anticipated, I'll be honest. And it's actually really great to be able to talk to them in ways that you couldn't before, because now they really understand a lot of things, and they have the ability for abstract thought. So you can have really deep conversations with them about brainwashing, about anything, but about a lot of things, but also about cults, about brainwashing and the fallibility of our belief systems. And I've had a lot of really awesome conversations with my kids, and sometimes, you know, I'll watch actually some like cult related movies with the kids, and it's really sparked some really amazing conversations that I think is just great. Anyway, and I have discovered that being the mother of teenagers is really not even close to being as hard as I thought it was going to be. I mean, my own teenage years were so difficult and just so hard. And I'm not having that experience, you know, knock on wood, nothing bad has happened yet. I suppose it's never too late for something to happen, but so far it's been good. You know, when I was a teenager, like, it was automatically assumed that I was going to be a slut and I was going to start sleeping around and that I was going to be into drugs. And so I kind of lived up to the expectations that were given to me. And I kind of, you know, even as an adult, I kind of thought that that's what being a teenager was going to be about. But I've learned now that it's not. It's just not. And, you know, my 15-year-old is such a good kid, and I never lost faith in him. I'll tell you that. I never thought that he was going to be that kind of person, but I somehow in my mind had this idea that that's what being a teenager was about, and it's just not. There's a really good story about how about how that was shown to me that that's not the case. And so, of course, I do have my kids on my Life 360 app, really more so they can keep track of where I am as opposed to me keeping track of them. But there was one day when I got a call from the school that my 15-year-old was not at school. And I checked on my Life 360 map, and I know I have total faith in who he is as a person. I have a total faith in his character. I knew he wasn't into no good. I knew he wouldn't skip class on purpose. But I checked my Life 360 app to see where he was, and it put him in the field right next to the school. And I flipped out and thought that he must have, like, some horrible person had drug him out there, had beat him up and was doing something horrible to him. And I was about to leave work and go out there and look for him, I swear. But anyway, and I was telling this story, you know, and nothing happened to him. I'll just tell you that it was all good. I mean, but I was telling this story to someone else, and they said, "So did you think he was out there doing drugs?" And I'm like, "No." You know what? That thought never crossed my mind, not even for a second. Like, I have so much faith in in his character and who he is as a person that I would never believe that about him. And that's different, because when I was a teenager, that's exactly what my parents would have thought about me. They would have thought I was out there doing drugs, having sex, doing something like that. That's who they thought I was. I don't think that's who my son is. I don't think that's who any of my kids are. And you know what? The parents' expectations do a lot they do a lot to make the kid who they end up being. I learned from my parents who I was supposed to be, and I tried to be that person. My kids know from me what I expect of them, you know, and I expect great things from them, and that's what they strive for, you know. So anyway, it's a totally different thing. And my son, by the way, all that happened to him is my ex-husband had picked him up to get his passport renewed, so he'd missed a couple classes, but nobody ever told me that was going to happen. So I got the call that he was out of school, and I didn't know why. But anyway, he was back at school by the time I went looking for him, so it's all good. Okay, number 3. There will be challenges and power struggles. Yes, there will be. But at this point, you know, they need more choice. They need more freedom to make their own choices. But also they need the freedom to experience the consequences. So don't save your kids from the consequences, because those consequences, they need to learn about life in the real world. And so they have to experience the consequences too. But, you know, I think that if you lay the groundwork early when they're little, then it won't be that bad when they're teenagers. I think it's going to be okay. I mean, it's been okay for me. It hasn't been anything as scary as what I thought it would be. It's all good. Okay. So that is actually my last slide. And okay, so Anne and
so
Joseph, do we have any questions?
Here we are.
Yeah, hey, hi Ava. Thank you so much for a compelling, honest, and powerful presentation. I do appreciate it.
Yeah.
And there are some questions that came in.
If you could stop screen sharing, then we can all go large.
If I can stop, oh, stop screen sharing. Oh, okay, yeah.
There you go.
There we go.
Okay, good, yeah.
So I have a question here. Since you didn't have healthy role models from your own parents, what sources did you go to develop your more healthy and balanced parenting style that you clearly have presented here tonight?
Well, I have read books and magazines and listened to parenting experts. I swear, I started reading Parents Magazine when I was 13 years old.
Wow.
And in fact, I not only read it, I devoured it. And I compared the parenting that they described in Parents Magazine to what I saw in adults, and noticed a huge difference. And I thought that what they were talking about in Parents Magazine just seemed a lot more reasonable. And so really, I mean, just sources like that. I mean, just really just kind of doing my own research and reading and trying to figure out what to do.
So,
Kind of thing that just popped on my screen. I probably just need to X out of that. Okay. Yeah.
You don't need to answer the poll.
yeah.
Right.
But first of all, thank you very much for an extremely articulate and candid discussion of this very difficult issue, both for the wisdom that you shared and the that you shared, and also for your candor about your own experiences and some difficult times and difficult issues you've confronted. I think it's extremely useful. And I would just observe something. When you were talking about discipline and consequences, I was struck by how much the negative aspects of discipline were what we experienced in the cults that we grew up in. The rigidity, being called bad names, or on the other side, excess control with negative reinforcement. There was no such thing as positive reinforcement.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then the other side was being abandoned and left on our own.
Right, it was like, it was...
Someone told me I couldn't cross the street. You know, little thing.
Uh-huh. It was either one way or the other. Like there was never this kind of balanced discipline. Like either it was super rigid or it was super negligent, you know? And it had to do with anything that was actually for our well-being. They really just didn't care at all. At the same time, there would be these incredibly rigid rules about other things. And it's I think that's just kind of a symptom of a larger problem. The larger problem being that the discipline was never designed to benefit the children at all, which is dysfunctional discipline. I mean, that's not what discipline is there for. The discipline is there, should be there to benefit the children.
Right. So question is, right now, you've been speaking, I understand, on a daily basis on Facebook as a physician about issues related to the coronavirus. And there are parents now all over this country, all over the world, who are their children at home in circumstances that are very different from ordinary life. Usually out, going to school at whatever age or what. So the question is, in what way do you think someone who has grown up in this environment that you did, and I did as well in a different group, how does that impact dealing with this new situation that we are faced with as parents with our children? There are demands on our sense of discipline, demands on our sense of structure. We have to think up all new ways to deal with our children on a daily basis that we didn't before. And to this with a history with, as you were describing, of no real knowledge of how to impose discipline or how to set structure. So how do you think that impacts dealing with this now?
Well, I think that that having structure in a time like this is especially important because the structure is going to help make sure that everybody's needs are getting taken care of. Like if you can maintain kind of a schedule at home, as far as like when you do your schoolwork and you know, lunchtime and playtime and video game time, you know, it's creating that kind of structure at home, even though you don't have, you know, you don't have these institutions external to ourselves imposing structure anymore. So we don't have the school imposing the structure. But if you can if you can create that structure at home, it's really helpful. I do think that ultimately, in the time of COVID-19, when families are all being forced to stay at home together, spending a lot more time together than they ever have before and taking on new roles that they haven't before, I think that if they can make preserving the relationship their top priority, I think it's going to go a long way. Like, I wouldn't, you know, even if you don't get all the schoolwork done, even if you don't get all the laundry done, even if the house isn't as picked up as you want, if you can preserve the bond in the family members as a positive thing, and if you're not constantly fighting, and if you don't hate each other by the time you're done with COVID-19, I think you're okay. So I think that actually I put the relationships first in this situation. I mean, we want our kids to do well in school and everything, but I mean, ultimately they will catch up, I think. I mean, and you want them to do the schoolwork too, but you can't do it at the expense of the relationship. And everybody's under a lot of stress right now. I mean, the financial strains and parents working from home and people with little kids, and I'm actually really fortunate in this situation because my kids are older and they're really independent, and they're able to do so much on their own, and plus I have a really awesome husband who takes care of them and has been helping with the homeschooling, because I mean I'm still going to my office. I mean yeah,
you're busy. Yeah.
So I'm actually really fortunate. Yeah.
So we do have another question. If your ex developed overt narcissistic behaviors during the cult experience and resulted in covert groomed alienation of one of two children post-cult, I think the person posing this is describing themselves. Your ex developed covert narcissistic behaviors during the cult experience.
Okay, well, he wasn't in the cult, but I guess if somebody, it's just somebody else. Yeah.
And resulted in covert groomed alienation of one of two children post-cult, what strategies can you suggest to help both children develop resiliency and normal relations with the alienated parent? So I think this is describing their own experience.
Right, yeah. So
the father
ex who is alienating a child?
Yeah, one of the two. Yeah.
So
yeah, right. Well, you know,
one child, right?
One child as opposed to the other.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I think that you have to you have to talk to them about it and explain the best you can what's going on, and that's really hard. But I remember. And especially when they're really little. I mean, I don't know how old these kids are exactly, but if they're really tiny, then that's really tough. And I don't, you know, what do? You give the alienated one some extra love. I do know, you know, I've dealt with that a little bit. Like my ex is pretty narcissistic and can be pretty mean and nasty to the kids and not appreciate like just who they are. I mean, I feel like my kids are such wonderful kids, and you know, I've talked to them about when they feel that way, because they often feel rejected by their dad, and when they feel that way, I've talked to them and told them, look, you know, you are a really awesome kid. I mean, you are so great, and I point out all their strengths. You know, I say you are super smart, you're doing so great in school, you have all these talents. And you know what? if your dad can't appreciate those things, that's his problem. That's because he has an issue, not because you do. Because there is nothing wrong with you, and there is nothing about you that isn't completely lovable, that any dad wouldn't be super proud of. So if he can't be proud of those things and love you for all the wonderful things about you, it's because he has a problem, not you. So, I mean, I think you can, when you get to a certain age, you can have those conversations with the kids. I mean, I don't think that you can stop. I don't think there's anything you can really do to make it not be painful, though. I mean, it's going to be painful. But you just have to consistently remind them.
That the children are teens.
Huh? I'm sorry?
The children are teens.
The person who posed the question answered what age the children are. They're in their teens.
Yeah, mine are. But I remember having those conversations with my kids around 9-10 years old, and having to really sink in and make a really big difference.
I think it would be somewhat like divorced parents, where the two parents try to alienate the children from the other parent.
Yeah, that
allegiance with the father, and the other has allegiance to the mother, and
yeah, that would be really hard. So how would you deal with that issue?
right.
I mean, I think you just have to be as loving to your kids as possible, and hope that, and if they don't see it right now because what the ex is doing, I think that if you're consistent, hopefully one day they will, just show them that you love them in your words, your actions, your everything. And hopefully it'll come through one day.
So another question is, when you have children who are even into their teens going through this pandemic, which is such a frightening thing, of something which is really not very well understood, but it's a threat, and it's evil, it's bad, it can hurt you, it hurts your friends. How do you have children experience this and not just feel the world is a terrible place? We grew up feeling the world was a terrible place and our leaders could save us. But we don't want to be like that. We don't want to have our children feel that, the world is terrible and then this mythical or deceitful figure is going to save them. So how do you negotiate that as parents?
Well, I think that you can look at the positive things that are in store in the future. I mean, we are going through a difficult time right now. However, healthcare workers are working hard to save people. Scientists are working hard to get treatments, and they are succeeding. There's positive treatments coming out of this. Scientists are also working hard to get a vaccine, and there will be a vaccine. And when we can all get vaccinated, we'll all be safe, and we're not going to have to worry about this anymore. So although those things take time, and it doesn't, in the meantime, the world is scary, there is definitely hope on the horizon. I mean, this is not going to be our reality for the rest of our lives. We're going to pull through this, and we are going to find a solution.
There's another question that came to mind. How do you balance the interactions you have with your mother in the presence of your kids and your feelings about her?
Okay. Well, I don't talk to my mother at all.
Okay.
I've completely eliminated my mother from my life. So they don't have to witness that. I think that would be really, really tough, because my mom is always finding ways to undermine me and put me down and make me miserable and make me mad. And yeah, I really wouldn't want my kids to do that. So I've dealt with it by basically just not allowing her in my life.
you know, the toxicity sometimes has to be eliminated, and you found a
Right,
way
you
to
just
do
have to
that.
get rid of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to spend my life fighting with her, and I don't want my kids to see that. So
Sure.
I'm gonna just yeah, get rid of it.
But they do have an independent kind of relationship with her, with their father. Is that right?
Yeah, because she goes and she's at his house when they go see him.
Okay.
You know, she does stuff. She does fun stuff with them. She loves to take them shopping and buy them clothes. You know, so and so they have fun with that. They do recognize that she's a nut job, but in their life, she's the source of a lot of gifts for them, and so they like that. That's fun for them. She's goofy, but in kind of a lovable, nutty kind of way. You know, it's it's the kind of person you always kind of laugh at and roll your eyes at, but it's not evil, really, from their perspective. I mean, I think it's okay for them that, and she does say something completely bizarre, like she does have some bizarre beliefs, like she thinks my oldest son is my father reincarnated. I mean, they have enough. They're well grounded enough from me and my perspective to go, oh yeah, she's crazy.
Yeah, good.
But
Yeah.
I think we've come to an hour here, and I think we're going to wrap up. But I just want to thank you again.
Thanks so much, Eva.
Yeah,
in yourself, you do extend a great amount of hope and clarity.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, and for
And this is a busy time for you, and we appreciate the time you've taken
you're
to
taking
share
the time to
with
do
us.
this. You're taking
Yeah.
It's been very helpful.
Well, you're welcome. It was my pleasure. I'm glad I was able to do it.
Great.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a great night.
Yes, you too. You too.
Okay. Stay safe.
Yes. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So for our participants listening in here, just to remind you that there are 4 remaining webinars in this month-long series, Recovery Not Canceled, of the International Cultic Studies Association. Tomorrow at noon Eastern Time, Don't Waste Your Quarantine, Recovery Strategies for Former Members During the Coronavirus Crisis. That will be with Doug and Wendy Duncan. Then on Monday at 12 noon, again, Eastern Time, this is all Eastern Time, and these are all presentations with question and answer. Monday at noon, Coping with Domestic Abuse in COVID-19. That will be presented by Elizabeth Burchard. On Tuesday at 12 noon, Jilly Jenkinson will be conducting a kind of wrap-up presentation for this month-long series with question and answer. And on Tuesday at 8 o'clock in the evening Eastern, again, a live presentation with question and answer with Rachel Bernstein. And those will be the final 2 webinars in this series. So to all of you out there who've been listening, during this very difficult time when we're all closed in by this pandemic, we'd like you to know that if you have financial hardship and would like to continue to access the resources of ICSA, you can get a free web membership. You can send a message to mail@icsahome.com and just say that you would like a free web membership. So again, thank you for joining us. We wish you to stay safe, stay healthy, and possibly we will see you in future webinars. So, good evening.